He has edited more than 6 volumes of The Rise of Asia, Roosevelt in 2010, and has written over 100 papers in scholarly journal and more than 77 chapters in multi-author volumes. Before further ado, let me invite Professor Premachandra to the floor for him to give the presentation, to share with you the experience, the knowledge about trade, about economic globalization, particularly the global production sharing, and what can policymakers, what can researchers like us and those in the audience benefit from this one. So Professor Premachandra, over to you.
Thank you.
Just before Professor Premachandra start his presentation, let me also share with you the Asian Vision Institute and the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University has been cooperating on providing quantitative research training to 12 students, 10 from Cambodia, 1 from Laos, and 1 from Myanmar. This is a new initiative to promote capacity building, to connect between scholars, researchers, think tanks, and to promote the common understanding of how we shape policy that benefit everyone in the global production and trade. Thank you so much, Professor Premachandra. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kim Long, for the nice introduction. And I would like to thank you, my colleague Budi and Lydia and others for the opportunity to participate in your seminar series. I also happy to see so many familiar faces among the listeners. The topic assigned to me is a very broad one. Again, Kim Long came up with a number of interesting issues. I'm not quite sure within 45 minutes I can cover everything, but I have prepared a detailed PowerPoint presentation encompassing most of these issues. I might skip some slides because of the time limitation. We can continue to discuss these things through email and other means. Let me start sharing my slides. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, can you see the slides? Yeah. My topic is global production sharing and its implications for export-led industrialization, with a focus on countries in South Asian region, in particular, latecomers to industrialization, the 4 countries Kim Long mentioned, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. But I will undertake my analysis from a comparative, global, and regional perspective. This is the way I'm going to organize my presentation. I'm going to start with a basic introduction to the concept of global production sharing and manufacturing value chain. Then discuss briefly opportunities for export-led industrialization opened up by the ongoing process of global production sharing. And the major focus of the presentation is on trends and patterns of global production sharing, focusing on intercountry differences in reaping gain from this phenomena in Southeast Asian countries. And in addition to the topic I listed in my earlier PowerPoint that we have distributed, I have added a short section about the controversial issue of whether global production sharing has run out of steam. A lot of people talk about limitation of the process under the so-called fourth industrialization debate. I'm going to touch upon this briefly. Finally, policy options for latecomers and concluding remarks. I think it is when you introduce a subject, my experience is that it is good to start with some pictures. Pictures tell much more appealing, eye-catching story than simply when I mentioned it in words. Look at, to explain global production, sharing, and manufacturing value chain, I have 3 slides. Perhaps you would have seen them already. Now, the first slide is about Thailand-centered hard disk drive network. The computer I am using has components produced in more than 60 countries. But within those components, I am focusing on one, which is hard disk. Now, Thailand is the major hard disk assembler in the world, accounting for about 45% of total hard disks traded in the world. However, hard disk drive is not entirely made in Thailand. As you can see in the picture, at least 10 countries participate in this production process. Then the second example is something I developed based on my field work in Sri Lanka, which I undertook with Hal Hill 2 years ago. This is Nike Flyknit shoe connection. You buy Flyknit shoes mainly because of the trade name of Nike. Nike sell it worldwide, but it is produced with participation of many countries. Machines are produced in Germany. Ultralight performance fabric to knit in the upper is produced in the US. And the upper is knitted in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a major apparel producer called Mars, and Sri Lanka is an early liberalizer in the region, and therefore these companies has developed a very good technology base for producing knitted garments, knitted wear. Therefore, Nike has chosen that company to do the most high-tech part of the shoe, which is knit in the upper part. Once that is done, the shoe is eventually produced in another country, which is Vietnam, because rubber is cheap, rubber soles are there, and then cheap labor, and then it has become the final assembly base. Now, this example comes from World Development Report 2000, the humble bicycle. This is a bicycle assembled in Vietnam. Components come at least from 10 countries. Now, with these 3 examples, I think the definition of global production sharing is very clear to you. It is simply the internationalization of a production process of a given product in which several countries participate in different stages of the production process depending on their relative cost advantage. That is global production sharing. And it has come up under various names: international production fragmentation, vertical specialization, slice in value chain, and so on. Then I come to the next concept, global manufacturing value chain. It is simply the inter-firm relationship among a set of firms involved in global production sharing. In the hard disk drive case, there are more than 10 countries. There are companies located in these countries. Their interrelationship in the production process is called the global manufacturing value chain. In my presentation, I use the term GMVC trade to refer to trade within global manufacturing value chain. Then GMVC trade has got two parts, two components. Firstly, part and components. Secondly, final assembly. Say Malaysia assemble semiconductors. China do the final assembly of hand phones, right? Both are part of global production network. Many people get confused and simply focus on part and component, then you get only a half of the, not the entire picture. Now, another issue is that people mix up standard intermediate inputs and part and component. Particularly, people working with input-output table do this mistake all the time. But part and components are only a subset of intermediate goods. Iron and steel or coke is intermediate goods. But semiconductors or component used in a car are very different. Say a component or a part become commercially tradable only when it's embedded in a final good. You do not go to the supermarket and buy a semiconductor, but you buy a computer where the semiconductor is embedded. But intermediate goods like iron and steel, they have a wider market. They have a commercial life on their own. People who mix up these two come up with very misleading interpretations using input-output tables. And then I want to make one clarification. You are familiar with the term GVC. World Bank always use it. And but separating global manufacturing value chain from the broader concept of GVC is very important, because GVC is basically overall governance structure which is applicable to both primary products and manufactured goods. People talk about coffee value chain, rubber value chain, but they are very different from the actual production processes related inter-firm relationships within manufacturing. Therefore, it is very important to make that distinction. I use the term global manufacturing value chain. In other words, I have added M to GVC to make it clear that I am referring specifically to international organization of different stages of the production process within vertically integrated global manufacturing industries. From policy point of view, it is very important to make this distinction. Say, foreign direct investment or trade policy relating to manufacturing is entirely different implications in terms of implications when you talk about other primary products. Even the World Bank always does this mistake, even it annulled the World Development Report. We need to clearly specify what we are going to analyze. We are talking about global manufacturing value chain. Now, global manufacturing value chain is not a homogeneous phenomenon. From policy point of view, you have to identify difference. Actually, the patterns can vary even among major products. We can discuss it later. But policy point of view, it is very important to distinguish between buyer-driven GMVC and producer-driven GMVC. Now, buyer-driven GVCs organized around the leading role of the international buyer. International buyer can be a massive retailer like Walmart, JCPenney, or Mark and Spencer, or a branded merchandiser like Nike, right? In this production network, main driving force is the international buyer. It decides what product are to be bought, how to design it, and so on. And in these production networks, there is room for local producers to join the production network through buyer network relationship, arm length relationship. And foreign direct investment is not a must. If you think about apparel value chain in Cambodia, there are many local companies directly dealing with international buyers, right? And these are products where the technology is not very sophisticated, very diffuse, light production processes. Therefore, local firms can play a big role based on the buyer's role. Now, input procurement is monitored by the lead firm, but there is room for local manufacturers to procure local imports depending on the quality standards, right? And then, secondly, producer-driven global manufacturing networks are built around the leading role of international multinational manufacturers. Think about the role of Apple in iPhone, iPad network, Intel, Samsung, Hitachi, Toyota, and so on. These networks are basically operating within electrical good, automotive, scientific, and medical equipment like high-tech industries, high-tech global industries. Even though the local developing countries undertake relatively labor-intensive activities within the industry. The bulk of global sharing, producer-driven global sharing, take place through inter-firm linkages. Because of this reason, FDI is very important in this area. FDI policy play an important role. Of course, locals get opportunity to develop subcontracting activities when foreign firms and they become deep-rooted even in a given country. For instance, in Penang, Malaysia, most of the producer-driven type big firms are operating. At the same time, there's a widespread subcontracting network developed over time. Now, original manufacturing firms were the leaders here, but over time, contract manufacturers have evolved, become leading players in this process. Foxconn is one example. At the same time, there are some intermediary multinationals, what I call SME MNEs or nano MNEs, like the company operating in Cambodia, Minibea, right? Now, it is true in some contracting activities for many multinational companies. Whatever it is, foreign direct investment is a key to get into these production networks. Now I come to the second subtopic, global production sharing and export-oriented industrialization. Global production sharing open up opportunities for countries to participate in a finer international division of labor. You don't have to produce a car from the beginning to end within your national boundaries. You can produce a simple component for the car, right? Now, one important point here is that is in a labor abundant country like Cambodia uh, or Vietnam, uh, the component or different segment of the production process undertaken in a given country is very labor intensive. Therefore, it is pro-poor because poor have got only one resource, which is labor. If by getting into this production network, you can create employment opportunities. Look at the difference between India and China. China's poverty rate declined from 50% to less than 1%. One of the key drivers was China's success in joining global manufacturing production network. Whereas in India, reforms have been half-hearted. Manufacturing is still biased toward capital-intensive activities. India is not a big player in global manufacturing network. Now, when you look at the East Asian experience or China experience, it is very clear that this type of specialization is pro-poor through employment generation. There are specific advantages of participating in global manufacturing production network. I'm going to highlight four of them. Firstly, when people talk about export-led industrialization, they always become concerned about the fallacy of composition factor. That means if many countries get into the production, eventually the final market will become inundated and the relative prices will decline to your disadvantage. This is a commonly used argument against export-led growth. But this argument is less relevant. I'm not saying completely irrelevant, much less relevant for GMEC participation because you specialize in different segments in production and new opportunities come up all the time. And 15 years ago, we didn't know about a product called smartphone. Smartphone is generally an outcome of global production sharing. There can be many more products like this coming on the market. Therefore, fallacy of composition argument is less binding in this case. Secondly, participation in global production network is likely to have a favorable atmosphere creating effect because you interact with foreign operators and new technologies developing within the industry all the time. Therefore, it creates what I call a Schumpeterian environment conducive for manufacturing growth when you become part of a global production network. Thirdly, economies of scale. Now, think about Cambodia. If you are producing apparel for the domestic market, how many companies can operate successfully? Not many, right? But you are producing for the global market, you have created closer to 500,000 jobs. In Sri Lanka, there's a single operator, one company employing 85,000 workers in that country. Now, it cannot happen if you are not thinking about linking into global production network. Finally, there is the advantage of circumventing the tyranny of distance. This is a popular Australian term. If you are far away from distant market, distance is become a very important determinant of trade cost. But within global production sharing, there is room for distant countries to specialize in high value but low weight components, which are mostly traded through as air cargo. Costa Rica is located in a distant part of the world, but it is a participant in Intel production network simply because the components are high value to weight. Therefore, air cargo is a possibility. There is a company in Australia producing components for Boeing Dreamliner. Tiny component, very valuable, but it is a profitable venture. These are the advantages. Now, one concern about specializing in global product within global production network is that a developing country which get into the production process might become locked in at a low stage of the production process. Therefore, some people argue that it is easy to do global production sharing, but it is less valuable from different development point of view. Actually, this argument you have to consider very carefully. Within global production network, there is always opportunity to move up the value ladder. Now, that concept can be explained using the simple analytical tool called smiling curve, a concept developed by Stan Shin, the founder of Asia Corporation in Taiwan. You can download Stan Shin's volume, which is available free of charge, and understand this. Initial stage, you will be doing simple labor-intensive assembly activities. You are at the bottom of the smile curve here, right? Yeah, like here. But on this side, when you move along this side, value addition is greater and your industry become much more deep-rooted. On the other hand, upstream R&D production, producing component designing, these activities are also much high value compared to low end. How a country can improve its ability to move along the smile curve is a very important policy issue. Depending on your policy environment, human capital base and all that, it opens up opportunities, even though not every country has benefited. Then I come to the main section, trends and patterns of GMVC trade, with emphasis on the South Asian countries. The way I do the analysis is discussed in my previous work, particularly in this Oxford Handbook chapter. The analysis is based on disaggregated trade data separated into GMVC trade and further disaggregated into part and component and final assembly, and then divided GMVC trade into buyer-driven and producer-driven network. I'm going to go through the key points quickly. Now, the most important development, one of the most important development in the global economy has been shifting manufacturing bases from developed countries to developing countries. Now, it is a long-term sustainable process. This process has been fundamentally driven by the role of global manufacturing value chain. The driving force is global production sharing. Figure 2 tell you the story. The share of manufactured goods in total exports from developing countries accounted for less than 10% uh, uh, in the late 80s. If you go back 10 years, actually it was about 2 to 3%. But this share has increased to over 55%. Now, after world manufacturing trade, more than 55% is accounted for by developing countries. Now, interesting point here is this has gone hand in hand with expansion in global production sharing. This is the story told by this diagram. When you take global manufacturing GMVC trade as a share of world GMVC trade, part and component as a share of total part and component trade, and the final assembly in the same way, all these three have moved nicely with the developing country share in world trade. In other words, if you think about globalizing your manufacturing sector, export orientation, you cannot ignore this phenomena. That is the key point of this paper. Now, I'm going to focus on South Asia. Firstly, South Asia as a region. Here I have covered all Southeast Asian countries other than Brunei, because Brunei does not have a manufacturing base. Now you can see manufacturing share in non-oil export increased from about 56% to over 73% within this period, about 3 decades. Again, if you go back, picture would be even more dramatic. Then GMVC share has gone hand in hand. A prime mover of this manufacturing share increase has been GMVC expansion in the region. Then third row shows that among GVCs, actually the most important component has been producer-driven GMVC. Buyer-driven GMVC, relatively less sophisticated, more labor-intensive activities, actually you can't ignore them, but the most important segment of global manufacturing value chain is producer-driven segment. Apparel and others are important, but their relative share is much more smaller. Now, again, you can see the region is still a small player in GMVC trade, but the share has increased significantly. Its share was about 2% in the late 80s. It increased to about 8% during that period. This is the broader picture. Basic lesson is that when you take all the countries together in the region, it is quite clear that manufacturing expansion is driven by global production sharing, right? Not by the traditional horizontal specialization, producing things from beginning to end within the given production location. Now, this is the broader picture. However, as the famous economic historian Alexander Gerschenkron has said, in any region, you have unity, but beneath that, you have diversity. You need to look at diversity to learn more about the ongoing process. Now, this table indicates for individual countries growth rate of GMVC export, GMVC share of total manufactured goods, and buyer-driven production network share and again part and component and so on. You can see that early entrance to this specialization, beginning with Singapore and then Thailand and Malaysia, they are specializing mostly in within producer-driven production network. That's why the buyer-driven share is very low in these countries. The newcomers have mostly entered into the buyer-driven network, where the technology is less sophisticated, production process is more labor intensive, relatively more labor intensive. Cheap labor is a key determinant. Then again, the table shows that through economic advancement, eventually these labor abundant countries, production structures are going to be similar to that of early entrance to the trade. And again, you can see part and component share is very high in early entrance, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and so on. And when it comes to produce buyer-driven production network, component rate is not very significant because you are involved in final assembly. And again, there is one striking difference among countries. Indonesia, even though it is located in a dynamic region with dynamic players in this specialization, has not done well compared to other countries, particularly Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia. The question is why. We can address it at the end when we discuss about policies. Now, the next slide gives detail about the product composition and what are the type of product each country specializes and so on. It is in two parts because of the page limitation. Firstly, producer-driven production network, its share in total manufacturing trade, and how it is distributed among countries. You can see electronic and electrical goods sector dominate, whereas automotive sector is important in Thailand and to a certain extent in Philippines and so on. Some countries have more diversified production base. Now here, when we focus on the four latecomers, only Vietnam production structure is somewhat similar to that of the early entrants in this trade. And the other three countries are at a relatively less sophisticated in terms of their production structure. And Laos is a little bit different. Laos has got a significantly higher share of part and component, buyer-driven, producer-driven production network share, simply because Laos is mostly doing subcontracting activities for producer-driven companies located in Thailand. And again, when it comes to labor-intensive production with a relatively small labor pool and relatively high wages, mainly because of migration to Thailand and so on, Laos is not doing very well in buyer-driven production network. It is mostly engaged in subcontracting activities for firms in Malaysia. Then Myanmar is not doing well either here. And then buyer-driven production network, you can see the composition. Given the time limit, I move to the next slides. Now, figure 3 plots data for the 4 newcomer countries. Basic idea here is that in all 4 countries, there has been increase in GMVC participation, but basically it has been driven by buyer-driven network engagement other than in Vietnam. Vietnam, earlier buyer-driven production dominated, but producer-driven production networks have started expanding at a rapid rate. You can look at these figures later. Now, in this section, I'm going to end up this section quickly focusing on the key issue nowadays you talk about. Now, China's production bases, GPN base has become more mature. It is shedding labor-intensive segment to other countries. To what extent other countries in the region have benefited from this process? To help you to understand this, I have produced a picture. It can be more complicated, but the story is very simple. Now on the right-hand axis, I have plotted China's share in total world export of GMBC product. Now you can see the dramatic increase in China's share from less than 10% to over closer to 25% during that period in the entire world markets. However, the rate of growth has slowed down. In recent years, there has been a minor decline. When you analyze Chinese data, it is clear that some labor-intensive segments are shifting from China to other countries, even though China is still the formidable global factory, right? Accounting for about 25% of total production. Therefore, people talk about China plus strategy. When China becomes mature, gradually shed labor-intensive segment, other countries benefit. But what the diagram shows is that the third largest country in the region with low wages and massive amount of trainable labor, Indonesia, has not done well in this area. In recent years, there has not been a significant increase in Indonesia's share in it. So is the case of Philippines. And naturally, Malaysia and Thailand, they are high-wage countries, and they have their own structural adjustment issues. Therefore, they are not going to benefit that much. But labor-abundant countries, Indonesia, India, which is not listed here, Philippines, Myanmar, they have opportunities, but they have not benefited. But the real beneficiary has been Vietnam. Vietnam's share in GMVC trade increased from less than 1% to closer to 5% during that period. It was a dramatic increase. Now, Vietnam's share is much larger than the share of all the other countries in the region. Why it has happened? I think we don't have that much time. Policy reform matter a lot. Policy certainty in addition to cheap labor. Then, have I run out of time? Yeah.
I think you have 10 more minutes. Yeah, until 11.
But then you don't have time for questions.
We will have time for question for about 30 minutes.
That's okay.
I think maybe
then I'll continue. I'll take about 5 minutes, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Now, here, after telling all these stories, before moving onto the policy issues, I want to ask the special question. The special question here is global production sharing running out of stream, right? Now, some countries are not doing well. Can policymakers in these countries come up with an excuse? In any way, the process has run out of steam. We can't do much. I think that idea is a very shallow, short-sighted one. Now, let me go through the debate a little bit. There's a growing concern in policy circle that advent of so-called fourth industrial revolution, IR4. uh, I have defined it in the next slide. You can have a look at it. Would put a limit to global production sharing. I know Indonesia has even created a different department or something to prepare for IR4, even though uh, Indonesia has not yet benefited from even IR 203, right? It is good to promote technology and other things, but you have to consider the current stage of the economy in the development process and then charter the development path according to. There are two concerns: reshoring or backshoring. Companies shifting production bases to their countries of origin. And again, secondly, substitution of labor for capital, even in production bases in developing countries because of robotization, 3D printing, and so on. Actually, this idea has been oversold by the World Development Forum because it is a money-making venture. The organizer of World Economic Forum, he found out this term for IR4 from an exhibition in Germany, and then it promoted in a big way, and the developing country prime ministers and policymakers have been misled by this, right? Then as yet, evidence of the possible impact on manufacturing capability in developing countries is rather patchy. In principle, almost all the production can be automated, but at a cost, right? The ability to do that depends very much on the complexity of the production process and bulkiness of the product. If it's a tiny component or tiny product, it can be very costly to robotize or automate, ignoring the human hands. At the same time, the potential create volume. In areas like medical devices and many areas, markets are narrow and specialized. In these areas, robotization costs can overwhelm the total production cost. You need to take into account all these factors. Most, if not all, the innovation that have given birth to IR4 mentioned in the previous slides are still in infancy. We still do not know how the transformation driven by them would unfold. We don't know. At least it will take years, right? Decade or more. The early sign of Industry 4 are still predominantly, if not totally, remain confined to mature industrialized countries. Even IR2, let on IR3, is yet be fully experienced by developing world, which account more than 2/3 of the world poor, right? So some element of IR4 can in fact have a positive impact on global production sharing by reducing the service link cost and coming up with new components and so on. Therefore, one should not get misled by the World Economic Forum message. Of course, you have to develop your R&D base, no doubt about it. Then finally, determinant of GMEC participation and policy options. Very briefly, relative labor cost has been the significant contributor to growing importance of developing countries' role in GMEC. Intercountry wage differences have played a significant role in shifting production bases to this country. And again, East Asia is a very attractive location in the world economy for this activity, simply because huge wage differences among countries in the region. High wage countries like Korea, Japan, very low wage countries like Cambodia. Therefore, there is room for production-based expansion in this region. But this is a very important point. Not all low-wage countries have gained from global production sharing. Look at this data, which I have put together from latest available sources. Indonesia is a low-wage country in the region. Budi tells me that this figure can be very low, mainly because informal sector wages are also captured. But even if you increase it by twofold, still you can see Indonesia's wages are only 1/3 of that of China, right? About 1/8 of that of South Korea. But Indonesia has not done very well. Myanmar has not done very well. And again, India, according to some of the work I have done, Indonesia is very similar to India in terms of GMBC participation. Therefore, one should not place too much emphasis on relative wages. What are the other key determinants? Not only wage, firstly, but overall labor market conditions. Secondly, service-linked cost. Thirdly, proactive foreign direct investment promotion. Now, to consider briefly, when you consider the labor market condition, you should not focus only on relative wages. There are other factors. At the initial stage, what is important is tradable unskilled worker and some middle-level manpower. You do not need Nobel Prize winning engineers to join global production network at the initial stage. Gokeng Sui, the founding father of electronic revolution in Singapore, had a very interesting statement. The skill required for a girl working in an electronic factory is not more than the skill required for a barber, right? So what is important is the skill and trainability at the initial stage. And then in the long run, of course, availability of high-level technical and manpower is vital for moving along the smile curve. Then human capital development, again, one should not exaggerate at this stage because it is partly endogenous. The beauty of manufacturing is that it had the capability of develop skill on the job. A girl joining apparel factory as a factory hand eventually become efficient machinist. Sometimes she might even run her own factory later, right? That ability is there. Then labor market flexibility is much more important than low wage, right? The hiring and firing workers and so on, depending on skill requirement. Then size of the domestic labor pool. This is a very important factor. When it comes to final assembly, size of the labor pool is very important. That's why China has become the final assembly center. Even a tiny country can find niche in different labor-intensive segment within the production base. The service link cost is basically cost involved in coordinating production block and tasks located across boundaries. Service link cost in a given country depending on the range of factors impacting on the overall investment environment. It's a catch-all term. Trade liberal and investment liberalization, trade-related infrastructure, institution quality, political stability, and everything. When you taken together, there is ample evidence that service link cost is much more important than cheap labor in some cases. Even if labor cost is a little higher, it can be compensated through service link cost. Then I'm going to finish.
Yes.
I am going to finish. In the rest of the presentation, I have summarized key points relating to two misleading policy issues in this area. The first one is FTA's role. Can free trade agreements help in the process? My answer, you can read it, the definitive no, and it can even complicate the picture. And you can read and we can communicate through email. Then use of value added as a policy criteria. When you read policy document in Indonesia, the most widely misused term is value added. But think about global production sharing, the value added of a product become disintegrated and separated across countries, right? That is global production sharing. Therefore, per unit value added is naturally going to be low. But policymakers should look at the market potential and the ability to move along the smile curve segments, right? Therefore, at the initial stage, even 10% value added, actually value added of hand phone assembled in China is less than 10%, right? What is important is the market potential and the ability to develop skills and move along the value added in the future. If you focus on value added, you are going to kill your opportunities in the first place. Now, finally, my concluding remarks briefly. International trade is no longer exchange of wine for clothes. That's how we learn, right? You produce a good from beginning to end and then export for another product produced from beginning to end in another country. That concept is no longer valid. More than 70% of for more than 70% of trade in this region, that concept is not valid. What is important is specialization in different segments. This phenomena called for a change in analytical and statistical tool we use to measure and understand the real world. Some people got wedded to input-output tables. Then, secondly, global production sharing is an increasingly important phenomena that shape pattern of global production and trade, which is directly relevant for countries' success in export expansion. Probably it is the most organizational innovation in this era of economic globalization. Thirdly, no evidence to suggest that GMP VC has run out of steam, at least for the time being, in the medium to fairly long run. The implications of global economic forum-led IR4 emphasis is vastly exaggerated in the policy debate. The expansion of global production sharing has made input and capital increasingly mobile across national boundaries, and hence part of production and trade has become more sensitive to overall investment climate of a country. And it is important, finally, it is important to promote wider shared understanding of the phenomena of global production sharing in business and policy communities. I think that can be a key objective of your institute, Kim Long. People still are in the import substitution era talking about domestic value added and doing everything globally. You should help to erase this mentality and help people to think globally in this era of global production sharing. I'll stop at that point.
Thank you so much, Professor Premachandra, for your very informative and very insightful presentation. I think we have some very important and practical insight to learn from your presentation. I think because we have about 23 more minutes, I give this opportunity for the audience to ask questions. And Lydia has kindly remind our audience to post question or raise your hand. But now we have three questions. The first of which is about the importance of global value chains, which have allowed countries to benefit or make use of its comparative advantage. So this question from May Ngo, and his or her specific question is about the last part. With respect to global value chain and global manufacturing value chain, is it or how whether developing countries can benefit from it to industrialize or to promote job growth in the manufacturing sector? The second question should go to Basa, I think. Yes, Professor, if you could provide your insight and perspective on this.
The first question, after that you can remind me the other one. The first one is whether the pandemic is going to have an adverse impact on relying on global production sharing as a development strategy. Pandemic is once in a century event, right? The last biggest pandemic was in 1918 and 1920. And the world after that, until recently, has been entirely different from the world before that, right? The once and for all event and continuing changes are two different things. And again, when it comes to global production sharing, actually, I did not have time to explain it. Some people talk about second unbundling, it happened in 1990 and so on, which is entirely wrong. This has been a long-term phenomena related with the emergence of multinationals. If you read about the multinational history, production networks stories had been there even in the early 19th century. The only difference is that when technological improvement, it has become a much more widespread phenomena. Now, it has happened because of reasons, right? Economic reasons. Therefore, pandemic will disrupt the process, but once the pandemic ended, the process will resume. And again, there is ample evidence when it comes to PPEs, personal protection equipment. I have just compiled data on this. Actually, eventually, it was global production network that helped countries to procure PPE quickly. And again, I read a news item recently about the Pfizer vaccine. Pfizer vaccine, even though it originated in Germany, it is not produced in Germany. More than 50 countries participate in the needle that you are going to get, right? Therefore, it is a universal phenomena. Production disruption disruption occur, true, but the process will continue. Again, consider about the earthquake in the Japan and floods in Thailand. Actually, the production network uh, resume operations very swiftly within 3 to 4 months' time after the event, simply because the specialization has been disintegrated among many countries. The recovery is going to be quick as well, because many countries participate in the recovery process. The second question, how developing countries benefit from this, I think it has been the key theme of my presentation. I explained why production sharing is important in helping countries to link to global production processes. What are the specific advantages, particularly labor intensity at the initial stage, knowledge spillover, and so on? I think throughout my presentation, I have addressed that question. That has been the key theme. Not only I came up with examples of success stories, but also failed stories along the way. The third question, I don't remember. Kim Long, can you remind me?
Park, no, thank you. With the second.
I know the last one is high protection, right? Does high trade protection lead to higher?
Yes, would you like me to read it?
Country industry. Indonesia is trying to liberalize its investment regime. However, its trade policy is still relatively protectionist. Actually, this is a very good question. One of the key points I have made in one slide at the end, which I skipped, is that when you look at successful countries in joining global production network, always trade liberalization and investment liberalization have gone hand in hand, simply because both are important in order to reduce service link cost. Now, each segment of production process operates at very tiny margin because the production process has spread across many countries. Therefore, even 2 or 3% tariff or implicit tariff involved in custom inefficiencies can virtually erase the profit margin of these activities. At the same time, when it comes to producer-driven production network, which account for more than 80% of total global GMVC trade, foreign direct investment is vital in order to set up production bases in a given country. Of course, over time, when production-based foreign investment operations become deep-rooted in a given country, it can open up opportunities for local firms to join. So in Penang, Malaysia, I have written it in one of my papers about a medical doctor who had a little bit interest in electronic component. He joined as a component supplier to Intel. Eventually, his company, you can do a Google search called NG Technology. He has become a multinational by himself with operations in 6 countries. There are many examples I came across in Penang when I did my fieldwork. Foreign investment attraction is very important. I'm happy to see the Omnibus Foreign Investment Act in Indonesia. It is going to be a very important first step for joining global production network, but at the same time, it is very important to reduce the trade cost through trade liberalization. I was in Indonesia for a couple of weeks a year ago, and I heard the story about Foxconn coming to Indonesia to set up a big plant, but eventually he gave up the idea, mainly because of trade and investment policy regime related issues. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Premachandra. I think we still have questions, but let's give this opportunity to Jenan and Albert. They have raised their hand, and Jayan and Albert, you can ask question. So start with Jayan Menon first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Chandra.
I can easily recognize your voice.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. And you've given us a lot of food for thought on these evolving issues. My question actually relates to the Cambodian case. The Cambodian government, in its long-term strategy, has emphasized diversifying its economy. And one way to read that, using your terminology, is a shift from buyer-driven GVCs to producer-driven GVCs. Yeah, because of the high concentration in the garment sector right now, they want to move towards manufacturing in the longer term. But of course, this is not easy to do. It has adjustment costs. It takes time. So I was wondering if you could share with us, based on your work in Sri Lanka, for instance, how we can manage this adjustment in the short to medium term. I mean, how can Cambodia, what opportunities or how can Cambodia move up the value chain within garments while gradually shifting from garments to manufacturing or from buyer-driven to producer-driven? So how can it try and do both in meeting this long-term objective of diversifying the economy? And then secondly, you said that you didn't have time to share experiences from Vietnam in its engagement in global production networks. Maybe this is a chance for you to say a bit more about the Vietnam experience for the rest of the region. Okay, thank you, Chandra.
Thank you very much. Very good question. I think you know how to answer them, but I will try by myself. Right? The first question, actually, government can't diversify the production base, but what the government can do is to provide the enabling environment. Right? Actually, when I look at Cambodian data, I have seen that there are some companies involved in producer-driven production network, that Japanese company Minibea or something, right? I think Japanese producers or multinational from other countries know about the low wage situation, advantage in Cambodia and so on. But other prerequisites are equally important. Infrastructure, efficiently operating free trade zones in the country, and more importantly, supervisory manpower. Actually, something I learned from India is one of the reasons why multinationals do not come there to benefit from low wage advantage is that India has got top level engineering faculties and all that. At the bottom, you have low skilled workers, but the middle is virtually empty in the country. Now, the lesson for Cambodia or any other country is that when the government create enabling environment, it is important to focus on development of supervisory manpower. Again, Singapore story supported cheap labor based assembly activities, then moving on to middle rank production activities, which required more supervisory manpower and so on. Therefore, I think it's a matter of creating an enabling environment. Relating to electronic, it's good that you asked about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had all the preconditions to become an electronic hub. When country liberalized in 1977, and we had a strong government at that stage with 2/3 majority, big multinational came to Sri Lanka to set up production bases. Motorola set up registered a company to initially employ 3,700 workers. Harris Corporation came with a proposal to set up a production base with 2,700 workers. But once political instability set in, these companies left the country. And Chet, the founding chairman of Penang Development Corporation, told me that when Motorola came to Sri Lanka, they became really concerned because Sri Lanka was a better place for an electronic hub compared to Penang. But Sri Lanka lost that opportunity. The main reason was political instability and lack of policy certainty. I think in Cambodia, that is also a factor, right? Policy uncertainty, and again, political system is not well settled in the country. Then Vietnam, actually, I was involved in a major study about export reform process in Vietnam in the early 2000s. And my feeling is that even though slowly, Vietnam authorities have realized the importance of broad-based reform. And trade liberalization has gone hand in hand with FDI promotion. At the same time, they had a very strong investment promotion campaign. I remember in 2008, the government played a very big role by giving incentives to win investment tournament to bring Intel to the country. Then many companies follow Intel. And again, political stability is a factor, and trainable labor and sufficient percentage of supervisory manpower. I had the opportunity to interview one of the vice chairmen of Samsung. Actually, he placed more emphasis on policy certainty and government commitment to export-led oriented growth rather than to low wages as key determinant of their move to Hanoi to set up their plant. As you know, they started with simple assembly. Eventually, entire production base was shifted from China to Vietnam. Now, Samsung employ more than 150,000 workers in their factory. There are more than 30 significant subcontractors developed around Samsung. And Vietnam, of course, has all the basic preconditions, relatively larger country with a labor pool of about 40 million workers, political stability, trainable workers. At the same time, government commitment and firm policy commitment and policy certainty and investment promotion, everything have come in a package that explain the stellar performance of Vietnam so far in becoming part of the regional production network. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Premachandra. I think we still have a couple more questions, but let me continue with the last question first from Sri Rachman. Yes. With regard to technology, how does technology affect the distribution and mechanism of products in terms of the global manufacturing value chain among Southeast Asia during the pandemic? Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult question, but again, when you talk about global production sharing, different countries participate in the production value chain depending on its comparative advantage. Now, when it comes to labor intensive segment in the production process, as I have mentioned in one of the slides, policymakers in these countries vastly exaggerated the importance of domestic technology, right? I mean, the technology and capital is mobile within global production network. Therefore, if the investment environment is conducive, and if you have trainable labor, and to supplement that trainable supervisory manpower, a country can get into the production network. And the technology is basically endogenous to the system. A country simply setting up an engineering faculty to train engineers, of course, it will give these people to the basic abilities to absorb technology, to train in a factory. But eventually, the development of technology is endogenous to the process of upward mobility within the production network. Therefore, in a low-wage country, it is entirely incorrect to place emphasis on technology first. It is enabling environment and trainable labor. As Goken Sui said, the skill required for a girl in an electronic factory in Singapore was not more than the skill required to become a good barber, right? Then it depends very much on the stage of development. And the most important point is embedded technology. To give an example, in a it is elastic producing company in Sri Lanka called Straight Line. It owns patents for 5 different type of technologies developed by that company. I interviewed this firm. These new techniques were developed by a person with simply HSC qualification. I mean, he got into the production process and learned the process, and eventually he came up with these techniques, developments, and even the Swiss company which had produced supplying machines to the company became surprised to hear what this guy did. Now these 5 patents earned a lot of profit to the company. It happened along the way. Yeah.
I think for one more question, and can we ask Manorit? Manorit, would you like to ask a question directly? Manorit Sen?
Yes, sure,
please. Please.
So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Chandra for your informative and insightful presentations. So it's moderated from Cambodia. So I have actually have one question. So regarding the COVID-19, we see that there has been reshaping the business, investment, and also trade. So in that, we also expected the shifting in production from global supply chain to regional supply chains. So how do you see the developing country, especially Cambodia, would do to benefit those expected reallocation of their production into the developing country, especially in Cambodia? So this is my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I think this is a research issue. Now, it is just a speculation that it is because of pandemic, production bases are shifting. There have been, say, according to the data I have seen, actually, there has been a long-term driver here, which is relevant for understanding the industrialization process in East Asia. Initially, I mean, Japan was specializing in labor-intensive product. Then when the wages started increasing, the manufacturing process moved towards more capital and technology-intensive product, leaving room for other companies. If you study Chinese case carefully, it is happening. Look at the figure 4 I showed earlier. The rate of expansion of China's exports within global production network is still formidable, but it has slowed down. When wages increasing, naturally companies have been shifting labor-intensive segment to the other countries. And the issue whether pandemic would expedite that, I'm doubtful. There are many studies recently about PPEs. Actually, it was China, and basically it was because the second wave was prevented by Chinese authorities. China was the savior of other countries. Germany, France, US, the 2/3 of the PPE requirements were procured from China. But again, it's not the China story. 3M, the biggest surgical mask producer in the US, procured most of the supplies from China, which is within the global production network. They produce high quality yarn and export to China. China has the advantage of massive factories and a massive labor pool, and therefore they did the production. Actually, my hypothesis is that pandemic has strengthened, not weakened, the case for global production sharing. Therefore, you have to keep eye on mostly on the long-term changes. When wages are increasing, production costs increasing in China, there will be shift in production bases to other countries. It is happening in Cambodia at a small scale, but depending on the reform process and the certainty in the investment environment and the availability of complementary supervisory manpower, I think Cambodia is in a good position to benefit from this process. Again, global production sharing is not a recent change. It has been a change going on for more than 100 years, even though the rate has expedited in recent years. Therefore, it is not going to reverse, but countries need to benefit from opportunities created within that dynamic process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Premachandra. I think we run out of time, and then I would like to thank all the audience for their participation, for their active participation, for the questions and also insight. And I thank my colleague from Asian Vision Institute, Professor Budi Riso Sudamo from the NGO Indonesia project, Lydia. And now I would like to turn the floor to Lydia for any other unfinished business and future announcement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandra, and thank you, Kim. From me, not too much information. I'll just put up a slide announcing our next events. But feel free, everyone, if you would like to exit the Zoom room. Thank you again, Chandra, for a very nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Chandra.
It was really informative
nice.
for me with something new. I learned something new.
And Lydia, as you would have seen, I have added the new section to my slide. Therefore, I'll send you the full slide so that you can share with participants.
Okay, I already have your slides. You sent it to me earlier?
No. I have added the new section. It is
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I will repost it and then inform the participants.
Yeah. It was so good.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How many participants?
I think we reached 70 something earlier, and then there were some people on YouTube as well. When I checked, it was 12 people. I will update in the email.
All right. Thank you.
But it was great to see so many people from everywhere. So some from Canberra, from of course Cambodia, and I think is Jayan based in the Philippines?
No, he's in